He's been called the last American hero, and in many ways, the biography of Junior Johnson is larger than life. Born in Wilkes County in 1931, Johnson burst onto the racing scene 18 years later, finishing second in a preliminary contest at North Wilkesboro. By that time, Johnson was a veteran whiskey runner, hauling moonshine across the South on an almost daily basis. After outdriving federal agents on dark and treacherous roads, racing on sanctioned tracks was easy. Johnson scored 50 checkered flags as a driver, including victories at Daytona, Charlotte, and Atlanta, and turned a number 3 Chevrolet into a state treasure. In 1966, he left the driver's seat and became a team owner. He managed some of NASCAR's greatest drivers over 3 decades and won 3 Winston Cup championships. He left NASCAR in 1995, returning to his farm to raise 2 children with his wife Lisa. Since then, Johnson has launched a legal moonshine business and a new NASCAR team, with his son Robert behind the wheel. Fearless on and off the track, Johnson is a man devoted to his family and mindful of his legacy. Tonight, an American hero drives a number 3 Chevy, glory on the racetrack, away from the driver's seat, and a new team owner.
This program is made possible by a grant from the A.J. Fletcher Foundation as part of its ongoing commitment to the Biographical Conversations series. The North Carolina-based foundation supports social justice, public broadcasting, education, the arts, and human services throughout North Carolina. And the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Time I was 15 or something, so I was hauling whiskey all over Winston-Salem, Charlotte, High Point, Greensboro. I had a lot of good opportunities to drive fast cars, good cars, and I knew I could make a lot of money driving them cars. I was tough on a car. I ran a car for every inch of endurance or whatever out of it. People tell me how fortunate I was or how good I was or whatever. And my comment to that most of the time, I've been a person that the good Lord gave 9 lives to.
Hello and welcome to the second part of our series of biographical conversations with Junior Johnson. Let's pick it up where we left off last time. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for sharing all of your time with us.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Turning now to Daytona Beach in February of 1960. Tell us about the hydraulic draft in Daytona. What is it and how did you discover it?
Accidentally, really. And it was a thing that I seen a car, the fastest cars there, one of them coming up on me, and he really was the fastest car because he was on the pole. And I says, well, if I can run with him, I can, win this race. And when he came by, I pulled in behind him, and sure enough, I could run with him. But, I'm gonna say I was 15 miles an hour slower than he was. And I could run all over him in his draft, but I didn't know what it was. And I still didn't know what it was until after the races was almost over when I seen Jack Smith and Bobby Johns a coming. And I knowed exactly what they was doing. They was using the same method that I was using to get to where I was at. And with them two Pontiacs, I didn't know if I could hang on to them or not. But when he went by, I dropped in behind Bobby, and that's when it jerked the back glass out of it, and it really lifted the car up off my ground about it. And it just went spinning around and around, went down through the infield. And I went on, you know, it didn't bother me because I just kept on going and went on won the race.
How did you feel when you crossed the finish line that day?
I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe it when I was in the winner's circle. You know, I went to different television stations in Daytona that evening and night, and they had news conference everywhere. Stuff is just absolutely unbelievable. It was a miracle, exactly what it was. It would not, you couldn't have planned it or done it any other way than what I did. But now they use the draft to win the race, but now they found out they can run 20 mile an hour faster by using the draft all the time. And that's just happened in the last couple of years at Daytona. So what's went around's to come around in a different fashion. Only thing they're doing is exactly what I did in 1960 now. But they was just doing it to get by the guy to win the race. Now they're doing it all the way around the racetrack. That's the way I did it in 1960.
According to our research, the track at Daytona caused so much damage to the cars that day that they had to close it down for the next few events. Is that true?
They have been parts of the track it's tore up and stuff. They have to close it down to repair it, yes.
It seems like for much of NASCAR's early history, tire technology in general had a hard time keeping up with the speed of the cars and the demands of the track. Was that a challenge for you as a driver?
It was, but I'm the one that they used as a guinea pig to punish the tires till they gave up. And I needed to know what my tires would do to make sure that I guarded against that application. So I tested the tires all the time. Goodyear, you know, nobody else would go test for them. And I'd test all the time for them because I wanted to know what I was on, and I wanted to know how far I could go and when that thing was going to blow out or whatever. But even if you know, you get in the race and you forget about what you're supposed to be looking after, steady thinking about outrunning somebody, and you'll blow a tire and hit the wall. And I did that a lot.
Are there different strategies that you use when you're racing on one of the super speedways versus racing on a dirt road or even on a short track?
Yes. Super speedways, you save your car as much as you can, and you stay behind as much as you can to wait till the latter part of the race to show what you've got. And that's the custom of a lot of them today, but it never was my custom. I went to the front and stayed there till I won the race or blew a tire or wrecked. So I just could not soft pedal the car. I never could, and I never would try.
Let's talk a minute about the 1962 Southern 500. You were flagged as the winner of that race, but after a protest regarding scoring, NASCAR declared that Larry Frank had won the race and you finished second. What was your reaction?
Same thing it is today. They cheated me out of it. And Glenn Wood and them run second. They put them in 8th place. Several other people got cheated too. The scoring was messed up. And Larry Frank, they know, set over in one of the turns about 8 or 10 laps, and he still got scored. And that's what's always followed that event. And the people scoring it wouldn't admit that they was wrong, that the scorecards showed that they were still scoring, but he is sitting on the racetrack.
At that point in time, how were NASCAR races scored?
Basically, their wives mostly to score, but they had one guy that run the scoring. And if the race people, their wives and stuff, did the job like it's supposed to be done, it was okay. But sometimes they'd miss and go to the bathroom and so on and so forth, and it was, they didn't have the equipment to keep scoring it. Then they went to 2 scores, and that helped a lot, but now they got a score they put underneath the car, and they don't have to have people scoring. They know every lap you run, you know.
1963 was the year that you raced your famed number 3 Chevy. How did that come about, and who owned that car?
Well, Chevrolet got into the racing business, and they came to me and Ray Fox. We was running Pontiacs and asked us to run a Chevrolet. And when they did, me and Ray Fox, and I was with Holly Farms and the Pontiacs with, you know, Holly Farms and Ray, myself, all 3 of them was in the thing. And we built Chevrolets in Daytona. And they gave Ray Fox 2 cars, and Holly Farms, the short track car, they gave to me for Holly Farms. And we got 7 motors for them 2 cars, and then Chevrolet pulled out. So Holly Farms was running on in the race teams and stuff, but Ray had 2 cars, and then we just had 1 at Holly Farms. And we went on without the factory with Holly Farms support and run, you know, the whole year.
Why did Chevy pull out of NASCAR in 1963?
Well, they had some kind of agreement that none of the motor companies would, you know, be involved in the sport because they thought it was dangerous. And it was dangerous, I guess, and it's still dangerous, but it was a great sport. And, you know, baseball, football, they're dangerous. Basketball, whatever you play in sports, you can get hurt in it. And the factories finally have figured out that winning on Sunday sells cars on Monday. And now they're in it full time all the time. And it's not NASCAR's doings, it's the automobile people themselves have wised up to support, I think, the biggest sport there are out there.
During the 1963 season, there seemed to be a rivalry between you and Fred Lorenzen. Was there some chatter coming out of the Lorenzen camp about Fred outrunning you?
Well, he never outrun me. He outlasted me most of the time. He couldn't outdrive me. You know, that's just a fact. And he, like World 600, I was leading it going down the backstretch with 2 laps to go, and somebody throws a beer bottle out in front of me. I run over and cut a tire down. he comes on the radio and says, well, I knew he's going to blow up because, you know, he's running the car too hard. Well, he creeps around there and wins a race about half lap down and brags about it. But Freddie was a good race driver, but he was not ahead of me, I can tell you that right now. And he knows it too, because I was a lot better and more skillful driver than he was.
Were there a lot of competitive rivalries between the drivers?
They was back then, yes, yes. It was a type thing where I'm better than you are and more skillful and got more nerve and I can outrun you. My car lasted, I won the race, that's just the way it was. You know. And that's one reason I wrecked well, I didn't wreck, I just blew a tire and hit the wall, that's what it was. But I never seen nobody I couldn't outrun. That's just a fact.
Do you see the same sort of competitive rivalries among the drivers today?
No, I don't.
What do you think is the difference?
Money. They make enough money they don't care where they finish. They want to run in front. Some of them does, but if a car's not to their liking, they'll just take that day and pocket it and go on to the next.
In 1964, NASCAR legend Fireball Roberts died after an accident at the Southern 500 in Charlotte. What do you recall from that race?
Well, me and Ned Jarrett was fighting for the lead. And I was leading the race. And they say that me and Ned got hooked up, and we did it in whatever matter it was. But you know, we was coming off the fourth turn and both of us spun, and Fireball came down and somebody hit him and spun him, and his car went down, hit the fence and slid down on the top, and when it stopped on the top, he was upside down in the car and it caught a fire, and he undid his safe belt and fell down in the car, and you know, the car's got a, you know, kind of bent roof, and he fell down in that gas, and he was just soaking wet in gas, and he got out of the car and got about 30 feet away from the car, and Ned Jarrett got a hold of him. He was closest to him and helped him get on away from the car a little bit, but he done burnt all over. He didn't have on nothing but a belt and the shoes. He'd burn all of his clothes off. So.
Did you feel any responsibility for that crash, and did it frighten you in any way?
Well, you know, we didn't cause him to wreck, but we caused the accident, me and Ned did. And, you know, you have to be a little bit disturbed that I was good friends with Fireball. Me and him run together and rode the racetracks back together, and you know, raced a lot together because we trusted each other. And when you find a guy at the racetrack that you can lean on and you can run with him and trust him and believe that he's going to take care of you. And you're part of the ones that wrecked, that caused him to wreck, or somebody else hit him over that I don't I don't know the particulars of it, but somebody hit him and wrecked him because he's trying to stop or something of that nature. But you're involved in it, and you do feel the effects of being involved in a wreck that somebody gets killed in, especially your friend. He was my friend.
After that accident, NASCAR increased several safety measures, including the use of fireproof suits and rubber fuel cells. Tell us about NASCAR and the way that they have handled safety issues throughout the years.
Well, that car had a homemade gas tank in it, very thin, not capable of holding what it's supposed to do, because the guy working on the car had built a lightweight car for Fireball, trying to get an advantage. And that gas tank should not have busted if it had been the right gas tank. And you got a lot of places to blame for what happened. But that's when they started putting the weight on the car and weighing the cars, because that was a lightweight race car that somebody had built to try to get an advantage in speed. And one thing that I never did was give up safety for speed. My cars was like a German tank. If they couldn't get them running that way, I'd go to some other kind of car. And it was not the wreck, it was the guy that built that car.
This must have been a stressful time for you. How did you deal with that stress?
Well, if I had anything to do with the cars at all, I made sure my car was safe. And I'd make up the speed. If it had too much weight or something, I'd make it up. I never cheated safety on my cars. And I've never had anybody hurt in my cars either. And I didn't get hurt in my cars, you know. So safety comes first, and it don't come in a lot of ways. You can do stuff that is safe. In a lot of ways you can do it and not know that you're not safe enough. So I always tried to figure out a way to make sure my cars are safe.
In 1964, a writer named Tom Wolfe came to Wilkes County to write about you. What was your first impression of Tom Wolfe?
Well, it was pretty funny. I had been to the racetrack, and at that time I lived about 12 miles from the racetrack. Had a little store over on the side of the highway from the race shops, and I had just come in and I'd got me a Pepsi Cola, and I stand there and I just turned it up and drunk a swallow of it and pulled it down, and here stands a guy with a suit on, a brown wool suit in July, and he is sweating, and he told me who he was and what he wanted. And I never will forget, there was 3 or 4 people in there, and when he left, he talked funny anyway. They wanted to know who he was and stuff. But he asked me a lot of questions right away, and I told him, I said, he introduced himself as Tom. And I said, Tom, what you're asking me, I'd be defending myself to make sure that you got what you wanted. And I said, I don't feel like that's fair. You need to get out in the county and talk to the people and then you can find out what kind of person I am, and if I'm any kind of race driver, and it's just not going to come from me. So he talked on a little bit. He said, well, I'm going to be at the race tomorrow. And I said, fine. Do you have any problems to getting in or anything like that? He said, no, I've already got my credentials and stuff. Talked to him 3 or 4 times after that. But he come 3 times to Wilkes County. And I talked to him a little bit about how I was thought about racing and stuff of that nature. And we raced in Asheville, Wilberville. Later on that year, and he was at that race, and I won the race. In fact, I won the last 2 there. And it wasn't the one that they blocked the track and stuff on, wouldn't let the people out. It was the one before that. And he wrote his own story. He got everything from the people in Wilkes County and the surroundings and at the racetrack. And he knew the people that owned the Biltmore estates, and he talked to people there about me and racing at Asheville and all that kind of stuff, and wrote his story. And a lot of people criticized it to start with, but when they got to reading it and thinking about it, it was so awesome nobody could believe it. And he won all kind of awards with the story. And today I still hear people say, professional writers, that nobody has ever written a story that tops Tom Wolfe's story about me. And it's a big honor. I tickled to death that I met him and he did what he did and how he did it.
The essay that Tom Wolfe wrote was entitled, "The Last American Hero is Junior Johnson." Yes. Did you enjoy reading the article, and was it accurate?
I enjoyed reading it, but what he wrote was accurate, and it's what he got from the people. The way he wrote it is what made the story. And I know why that it sounded like he wrote it, because I was so rambunctious type person. Nothing didn't fear me or scare me or deteriorate me or anything. I was that kind of person, and he picked up on it. That's what happened. Had no fear.
About 8 years later, a movie called The Last American Hero came out. It starred Jeff Bridges as Junior Jackson. Did you see the movie, and if so, what did you think about it?
I did see it, and it was authentic to start with. And then the movie part came on with Jeff and Valerie Perrine, and Geraldine Fitzgerald was playing my mother, and what was the guy playing my father? He was a great, great person, did a great job. To be a movie like it was, it's the best one that's ever come out. But it's hard to put an hour in 15 races. You know, you can't put 15 races in an hour. You can't put one race in an hour. So that's, you know, they had to go in and do the movie part of it as fast as they could, and to get it down to where people will sit an hour and 20 minutes, 30 minutes and watch a movie. They ain't gonna sit there no 4 or 5 hours, you know. So I was real tickled to death about the first part of it. Then, you know, the movie part played out itself. Some of it was accurate and some of it wasn't. You know, I didn't haul liquor with a false floor in a car and stuff like that. But, you know, 99% of the people didn't know that, you know what I mean? But they did a good job. He did an excellent job.
In 1965, you won 13 times in 36 starts, a very successful season. But at the same time, you were thinking about ending your days as a race car driver. Why at this point were you starting to think about retirement?
Well, you know, fast cars had been my whole life. And working on them and driving them and stuff of that nature. It got where it wasn't a challenge to, you know, to make my car run or me driving it. If it was anyways close, most of the time I won the race. And I lost a lot of interest in it when you start winning about a third of the races that you go to. And you get mad because your car tears up one time and you win 5 times. The one time it tore up made me madder, and the joy was for winning 4 or 5 races. So and when I got out of it and started working on the cars, you know, it was very satisfaction to me to try to beat the other guys at their own game and stuff. And I was sure that I had made the right decision when the first year was over with and working on cars for other drivers.
You posted your 50th NASCAR victory on October 3rd, 1965. It would also turn out to be your last victory in NASCAR, and it was on the track in North Wilkesboro. What do you remember about this day, and how special was it for you?
Well, that race was tremendously special because I had been preparing for it about 2 months, because I knew when that race was over with, I was going to announce my retirement, and I wanted to win it. And you know, I don't know if I would have retired if I'd have lost it, because I had made my plans that this is it. I'm going to get up and driving and quit. You know, probably plumb quit racing at all. And when I got that checkered flag, it was the most soothing thing to me that I ever had in racing, because I had completed what I thought was a real successful in the time frame. You know, I had a very successful career, because I won, you know, a lot of races in not very many years. And racing was hard to win 2 or 3, much less, you know, 10 or 13 and stuff like that. So I had thought I was at the end of my racing career, but that changed.
Tell us about Junior Johnson and Associates. When was this company created, and what was it comprised of?
Well, it was created after I run with Holly Farms. Holly Farms wanted to get out of the racing because I was not the driver, and they didn't have a real uh, desire, I'd say, to run somebody else because I was local. I was in the same business that they was in and stuff, and they had decided that they would, quit sponsoring the car, so they gave me all the equipment and stuff that they had to run a race car with, and quit. So I had the equipment to race with, but I had to get the money from somewhere else. And I started putting together a little small race team, and a few of my friends and stuff helped me a lot. And it just, I formed a company, and I started, getting people to help me with the sponsorship, it got where it was, was a pretty good business.
What were the pressures and challenges of being a race car owner that were different from being a driver?
Well, you didn't race one person like you did as a driver. You had 43 teams out there, and it's probably 15 or 20 people in some of the teams. And Holman Moody had probably 200 or 300 people working on Fred Lorenzo's car, and Fireball Roberts, I think, drove for Holman Moody a little bit. David Pearson drove for him and stuff like that. So you had to have a pretty strong presence at the racetrack to compete with like Petty Enterprise and Holman Moody, and there was several other big corporations in the sport that was just loaded with money to spend on the cars. And we didn't have it. We had to outsmart them, and that was the only way that we could win. And we outworked them and outsmarted them. That was our success to what we did in racing.
In 1966, you hired 5 different drivers to race for you. Who were these drivers?
Charlie Glotzback was one of them, and I think Darrell Derringer was one. And I put guys in the car that didn't have a ride, basically. And I can't remember about half of them, but I was hunting for that one guy that I need to stick with, and I knew I could work with when I was putting different guys in the car.
And what were you looking for? What would tell you when you found that one driver?
The determination and the skill of being able to handle a car and stuff. You could tell pretty quick when you hit that marker where that the guy don't give up and he's determined to win. And he has some kind of theory that he wants to be the best there are out there, and that's the kind of driver you need.
In September of 1967, you hired a driver named Leroy Yarbrough. Tell us about him.
Well, Leroy was the most fearless person I ever seen. I don't think he was afraid of anything, and certainly wasn't, scared to drive a race car. He was, if anybody went any harder on the racetrack, and he did. I never did see it while he was alive, because if you went fast, he went faster. And that was just the way he believed in driving a race car.
In 1969, Leroy Yarbrough won the Daytona 500. Tell us about that race.
We come down to the end, and I believe Cotton Owen was leading the race with Charlie Glossback, and we was running second, and we stopped and put on left side tires, and everybody said we'd lost the race. But we was gaining a second a lap on Charlie, and we had enough time gaining the speed that we was gaining on him to get to him about 3 laps to go. And we got to him about 1 lap to go when we got to him, and Leroy come down the front stretch and he was right on his bumper, and going down the back stretch he just motored right on by him and won the race.
1970 was a very different season for Leroy Yarbrough. He started only 17 races. The following year, in 1971, he only started in 4 races. Why the decrease in races during those 2 years compared to his success in 1969?
Well, through the winter he had came down with, he claimed he got bit with a spider or something or other that had took his memory away from him, and his mobilization to perform, and he just wasn't the same person, and he couldn't remember what he'd done in the past and stuff like that. So he tried to drive, but he couldn't. It wasn't there. He'd lost it.
9 years later, in 1980, Yarbrough was arrested for trying to strangle his mother. He was found to be mentally incompetent and did not stand trial. You tried to help him during this time. Tell us about that.
Well, I went in and got him to release Leroy to me, and I didn't ever think that he'd ever drive again. But if it could be some way I could help him, I appreciate what he'd done for me and stuff. I wanted to try to help him, and I put him in 3 different places. That I brought him back to Winston-Salem at the Baptist Hospital, and they put him in a ward where they thought they could really pull him out of what his problem was. And he stayed there about a month, and they worked with him and stuff, and no improvement at all. So I moved him to another place up at Morganton, and no improvement there, and I moved him from there to Asheville, and they worked on him about 5 weeks, I think they kept him, and they couldn't get any improvement either out of it. And I knew that I'd exhausted all the ins and outs that I could do for him. So I took him back to Florida and turned him back over to the people that had him and released him to me. And from that point on, I'd check on him, try to every day. And he was in a ward with a lot of other people compared to what he was. And he started to have trouble with, the people and stuff. And he just got worse and worse and worse. And when I heard that he tried to strangle his mother, it was hard to believe, but they said that was true. But whatever was wrong with him just took his whole life.
In 1984, Leroy Yarbrough died of a seizure in a mental hospital. Was his death tough for you?
Yes. Yes, it was, because you come, when somebody helps you, and you both do very, very well and have great success. If you're any kind of human, you take that to your grave. I still, have a lot of appreciation for Leroy Yarbrough.
After 1970, you were looking for sponsorship, and so you set up a meeting with the folks at R.J. Reynolds. What were you looking for when you set up that meeting?
I was looking for $850,000. And I told him, I says, I need a sponsor to sponsor my car, and it might be too much money for you to think you can't get this much out of it. But I got to have $850,000 to run my race car for a year, because that's what I've put together that I can do it for. And the guy kind of chuckled a little bit, and he says, well, we want to do something a whole lot bigger than that, because our budget to advertise Reynolds tobacco company, Lucky Strikes and Camels, and our brands has just been thrown off on TV, which we had $575 million we were spending on TV advertising. Well, when he said that, I knew that I had the $850,000, because that was the best thing they could get at that time, unless they went to a football team or something of that nature. But we sat there and talked and stuff a little bit, and I don't know why I even thought of it, but I said, well, if you've got that kind of money, you need to sponsor the whole sport, because the sport needs a sponsor the same as car people does too. And I knew I was going to get my $850,000, but I didn't think NASCAR, you could not run, if NASCAR had a race running and it was named something other, they couldn't be a car run that had that same name on it. And because it was a conflict, And they said, well, who do we talk to at NASCAR? And I said, you give me your contact, and I'll have Bill France Sr. to contact you. And he gave me the contact, and I called Bill and gave him the contact and told him to call him, interested in sponsoring NASCAR, be the name brand for NASCAR. And we talked on some more about the sponsorship of the car and stuff, and we decided to get back together again. And he was going to talk to NASCAR, see what it could put together there. So when my message come back to me, they had agreed with Bill France Sr. to sponsor the whole circuit. And then they called me up and told me that France wouldn't let them sponsor a car if it sponsored the whole event. And I was out of business.
The result of that meeting was the creation of the Winston Cup series. How important of a development would this be for NASCAR?
It brought NASCAR from like a past a baseball game to the pros. It was no question about it. They were set to go from there on. They had the money to sponsor the race and promote it and do all the stuff to bring in large corporations and stuff into sport. And it took off just like, it just went straight up, really. And it was great for me because I capitalized on a lot of the things that Winston it was involved in. Promotional stuff. I'd win a lot of money that they was putting in the sport, sponsoring it and stuff like that.
1972, you and Richard Howard hired Bobby Allison to drive. Tell us about Bobby Allison and why did you switch drivers here?
Bobby was probably the kingpin of all the drivers at that particular time. Plus, Coca-Cola was sponsoring him, and that was a big thing in the change. The talent of the driver and the sponsorship of the car was needed to be successful, and that's the reason that going to Bobby, he's a great race driver, and also Coca-Cola was a sponsor, and he had run the sponsor before, so they was coming back with him, and we had the 2-1 when we didn't went in it with him.
Tell us about the rivalry between Richard Petty and Bobby Allison as they competed for the 1972 Winston Cup.
Well, they as two human beings didn't like each other on the racetrack or off the racetrack, either one. And it was a competitive thing of he said, she said, or whatever. The language was that they couldn't stand each other. But the winning of, at that particular time, Chrysler was sponsoring Petty's, and they, to not win over an individual that didn't have, factory backing was damaging Petty's image a lot because he was winning everything he run because nobody had that factory backing to beat him. And they had two different personalities, and they just didn't get along at all. And but they had a run-in. They had about 3 or 4 run-ins, and Petty got the best of Bobby in every one of them. And it was kind of a laughing deal for them, and made Bobby madder and madder and madder at Petty. So after he left us and went somewhere else, he never did get along with Richard Petty till they quit racing. Both of them, now they get along fine,
Were rivalries like this commonplace in NASCAR?
Yes. These people that was driving could not stand some other drivers, and some of the drivers got along with everybody, but there's some of the drivers that didn't get along with each other. They'd done something to them that caused them to lose a race, or said something about them or something other, and they just despised each other.
Richard Petty won the 1972 Winston Cup, and a little later Bobby Allison talked some about his communication with you during that season. What did he say, and how did you assess your communication with Allison?
Well, Bobby claimed that I wouldn't talk to him and stuff of that nature, but Herb Dowd was a chief mechanic on the car, and for me to try to work with Bobby is anything other than the personal appearances and stuff of that nature was something that I didn't do. I didn't do it with other drivers. I let Herb and him work their stuff out together and stuff. But he didn't say that till after he quit. And I think the reason he said it, he was trying to defend himself for quitting, because he made a big mistake when he quit us. We would have took Bobby Allison to several championships.
We'll leave it there for now. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughts with us.
Thank you for letting me be here.
We'll pick it back up where we left off in the next of our series of biographical conversations with Junior Johnson. For more information on this series, please go to our website at www.unctv.org/biocon. Thanks for joining us.
This program is made possible by a grant from the A.J. Fletcher Foundation as part of its ongoing commitment to the Biographical Conversations series. The North Carolina-based foundation supports social justice, public broadcasting, education, the arts, and human services throughout North Carolina. And the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNCTV.